What's up, fam? It's Actuali podcast. We are back for another episode of Meaning Making 101. I'm Chris,
I am DJ.
and together we have been going through John Vervaeke's foundational awakening from the Meaning Crisis lecture series. It's a 50 lecture series that we've been going over for the past year, one episode a week. We did have to take the last month off, but we've only really taken a few other days off besides that. So I think we're going to be finishing this right at the cusp of 23 into 24, or right in the beginning of 24. Because we're on 42 now. For all of you that have been following us here on YouTube or on the podcast networks, we appreciate you guys. And for anyone that's new to this, and if you end up finding this subject matter interesting, check out Professor John Vervaeke's YouTube channel. Just look up John Vervaeke, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. You'll find this entire lecture series as well as other series that he's been doing since he did this grand release. And this whole thing is about helping humankind face the meaning crisis, as he has termed it, that we are in the midst of. It's basically the root of the many myriad existential crises facing our species at this time in history that's causing all of the breakdown and division and sense of separation and um, sense of meaninglessness that is pervading our culture. Membership and everything from churches to Boy Scouts has been going down. Trust in our systems of authority, such as be they academia, be they science, be they religion, be they government, have all been dwindling. And what is at the root of this? Well, Vervaeke has termed it the meaning crisis, and he takes us through this incredible historical, what would you call it, like
Voyage, sojourn.
voyage, a journey through history, um, utilizing ancient wisdom as well as modern neuroscience to help deepen our understanding of the situation we find ourselves in, and hopefully help inspire, usher in an awakening from the meaning crisis. I really love how this whole series has come full circle and brought some very profound, hard to understand concepts into quite stark clarity. And it's helped me personally in my own individual life. It's also helped me understand what's going on in the wider world and kind of get a sense of a handle on it, because it's such a destabilized time. We're all looking for some sense of stability. So yeah, welcome guys. Thank you so much for joining us here. What we're going to do now is we're just going to go over our previous episode, last episode that we did, which was the spirituality of relevance realization, and it was on awe, wonder, the sense of sacred and mystery. And now we're going to be on to 42 after we do this quick recap. And this episode is going to be on intelligence, rationality, and wisdom.
Yeah, so we were introduced to Stanovic and West, who are, I guess, looking into Cohen's idea that in previous episode or the past few episodes we've been talking about, how we make errors and whether it's the errors we make within a certain experiment, which I'm not going to go into the full experiment, but basically, everybody basically made the same error. Cohen was Cohen's theory that these were performance errors opposed to systemic errors, and as in like you have the competency to perform something, but you're messing it up. Whereas these experiments that we discussed in previous episodes were showing that people were actually making the errors in multiple areas, thus systemic. So anyway,
The
so
question is, how do we do good cognitive science?
yeah, so what Stanovic and West were saying is, well, if Cohen is right, all these errors that people make are performance errors, and and then we brought up Piaget and his question of how do we distinguish the errors of a child versus a drunkard. So like,
So competence versus performance, right?
um,
I think that's what we're talking about. Is evoking
yeah,
competence
yeah,
versus
yeah.
performance
Where,
distinction.
you know, so like a drunkard may be slurring his speech and not talking properly, not necessarily because he has a cognitive issue. It's other factors are getting in the way because he can
Yeah.
cognitively speak fine when he's not drunk, right?
So it's a
But
performance issue. There's no systematic errors going on
yeah,
in his brain that makes him like that all the time. It's a
yeah.
circumstantial
Whereas the child makes competency
competency
errors,
issues.
which are systemic errors, and the drunkard makes the performance non-systemic errors, but his ability is broken by the circumstances as opposed to the system itself. So how do we see if errors are systematic? Well, one error, you make an error in one thing and then another error and another thing and another thing, and it's the same kind of error. That would be a systemic error. We So in these experiments we went over, we were finding that the errors are systematic opposed to performance errors. And this is like a what? Like Cohen was thinking, or what he was leading to is basically these people are making performance errors, whereas looking into it further, we're actually finding they are systemic errors, which is a problem, right?
So the rationality errors, what we find now is overwhelming evidence at this point that our rationality errors are in fact systematic
Yeah.
errors that we're making.
Well,
We have
and
to be aware of our competence, yet there is an assumption here that Cohen assumes competence is singular or static or individualistic.
yeah, exactly. Whereas we tend to have multiple competencies, and they could be working against each other. Ideally, they're all working towards you helping fulfill your goals, but they can also be in conflict, right?
Yes, so our standards can grow as our competency grows.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because Cohen assumes that it's like a finished product,
Yep.
but childs develop
Mm-hmm.
through correcting and overcoming errors.
Yes.
So
Systematic errors. Yeah.
we, like, the child is to the adult as the adult is to the sage. There's still this growing process.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to give up this static idea of competence if we're going to move forward at this point.
That's right. So now we have a reliable way to
Yeah.
test for performance errors in previous
Yeah.
experiments, and we can track and understand how this is happening.
Yeah. So Stanovic and West basically agreed that Cohen's argument is right, but the conclusion is wrong.
Yeah, there isn't a single way that rationality works.
Yeah.
That's the error.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and you can,
The premise is competence is singular and static, but we see it's not. So we have multiple ways of
yeah.
problem solving.
Yeah. So the,
Modes, in fact, that we can be in.
yeah, the dual processing model.
Opponent processing. There's a lot of opponent processing going on, which is basically like calibration. Zooming in, zooming out a little bit until you get the focus right.
Yeah.
So that's what our relevance realization, cognitive capacity is constantly doing.
So then we're introduced to the third in this, in this discussion between scholars over time. Chaniak,
I think it's Cherniak.
Cherniak. Okay. Ought implies can. So if you ought to do it, you better be able to do it.
Yeah, we are applying the right normative theory
Yeah.
to participants of these experiments.
That's what we should be doing. Yes.
Yes.
So there's an issue with
We can't use standards of certainty and completeness because there's combinatorial explosion.
Yeah.
Trying to be absolutely certain.
And he phrased that the finitary predicament. So we can't make an experiment that leads to combinatorial explosion and cognitive suicide, and we can't be arbitrary either. We got to check what is relevant realization.
So we have to check the relevant aspects to solving any one problem.
So in these experiments, they're using formal logic, probability logic, certainty logic, which and these experiments are contextually limited, and for a reason, because if you tried to take all context and put it in there, then it would combinatorially explode.
Yeah, and when we look back on these experiments, we find, it's not about rationality, it was actually about intelligence. Knowing what, where, when, to what degree one should use formal logic. Because there's a deep difference between rationality and intelligence. It's foolishness is basically you can be highly intelligent but be acting for rationality.
Yeah. So Stanovic replied to this is like all of this stuff is right, but it's not about rationality, it's about intelligence, which we'll actually find out is not the case, but this is his argument here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so foolishness is high intelligence but not rationality. So to test intelligence is to test the ability to deal with computational limitations.
Yeah.
And the idea is G, general intelligence, equals GR, general rationality of reasoning. But what we find though is there's only a 0.3 correlation. Like it does intelligence does play a part, but it's not, it's only 0.3 out of 1.
Yeah, there should be a strong relation between intelligence and how well someone performs in these experiments.
So what is the thing that is
So
accounting for the rest of that?
yeah,
You know.
intelligence we find it's necessary, but it's not
Yeah.
entirely sufficient to explain how one is being well is rationalizing properly.
Yeah. And then Smedslund points out there is a difficulty with interpreting the experiments because you can't experiment your way out of interpretation.
That's right. Because even before that, Descartes said that rationality is logically false. Or to say that
I think Descartes.
Rationality is logicality.
Yes,
false.
yeah.
Neither is it intelligence.
Well, I think that's what.
So what is it? And then Smedslund gives.
Yeah, I think what Descartes was actually saying is that
he thought rationality was
logic, but that ends up
that's
being
false.
false. Yes,
That's
yes.
right. And then neither is it intelligence. So we found where Descartes made a misstep.
Yeah.
So what is it then? What's the missing piece here? And the very processes that make us intelligent don't make us rational.
Yeah.
So the third response was Smedslund in 1970.
Yeah, and
difficulty interpreting events.
Right, experiments.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's and you can't experiment your way out of interpretation.
That's right.
So, and
you can't interpret an experiment that's designed itself to interpret.
Yeah.
It's a fallacy and a misunderstanding.
Yeah, so we get into what the distinction between fallacy and misunderstanding. So a fallacy is you understand the problem correctly, but you reason it incorrectly, leading to a wrong answer. Whereas misinterpretation is you're reasoning correctly, but you misinterpreted the problem.
Yeah.
So the assumption of irrationality assumes fallacy and not misunderstanding. So it assumes that you understood the problem, but you're not reasoning correctly, opposed to not understanding the problem. But I think as we go on, that ends up getting let's see. We get into like how these categorizations for what is it to understand something. So you ask people to give you something that is identical or the same as X, like X. How do you understand X? Well, or how do you tell if somebody understands X? You ask them to give you something that's the same as X, that's different than X. Yep, and then something that implies X.
And then something that's relevant.
Yeah, and Smedslund put aside the relevance for now to look at the what's same, different, and implies.
Yes.
Let's see, two kinds of.
And so basically, we found scientists were assuming participants had understood the problem correctly and reasoned correctly when they deemed them irrational.
Yeah.
The fact that participants are consistently giving us the wrong answer actually seems to tell us that they've largely misunderstood the problem. So we find that relevance realization is key. It's intelligence and relevance realization is playing into our rationality. We need a normativity on how people formulate or construe, interpret, make sense of a problem. We need a way that's independent of inferential norms.
Yes, yeah. Because rationality is non-inferential and relevance is pre-inferential.
Yes, and relevance is pre-inferential in nature. That's right. So the proposal now is we do have a normativity on construal. We
Yeah.
understand what good problem formulation versus
Yeah.
bad problem formulation is. And we study this in insight problem solving,
Yeah.
so we can apply this here. In addition to inference being essential, insight
Yeah.
is also essential, and that really clicks. That
Yeah.
makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. 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 Being able to realize the relevance of something and see into it to then create a better problem.
Yes, yes. Even to zoom out and get a larger gestalt picture and intuit something from that. So it's that ability to do relevance realization, once again, is playing
Yeah.
heavily in here. So
So
understand both insight and inference.
yeah, our insight and rationality, not inference.
So,
Yeah.
okay,
So
I'm glad I wrote that.
yeah. So instead of using inference, we're using insight.
There.
Okay.
So the ways people are wise. If we give up being rational, it's just okay. So we're not looking for like a Spock-like creature,
Yeah.
basically, something that's pure logic. We're looking for multiple competencies, normativity of insight. Because intelligence is only weakly predictive of rationality.
And
What accounts for most of the variance?
yeah, and Stanovic had an idea with this is, we must have an issue with poor software, so bad psychotech, and then there's inappropriate cognitive style. Vervaeke didn't go too far into that, but because Vervaeke thinks there's less of a distinction than Stanovic thought, but we left it at that. So what is cognitive style? Well, cognitive style is a set of sensitivities and skills you must learn.
Styles, yeah.
Yeah.
Something you can learn, a cognitive style.
And so, what style is most predictive of success? Is this idea of active open-mindedness,
Yes.
which is to train yourself to look for the patterns of self-deception, your biases, your misused heuristics.
And this is where we find convergence between schools of philosophy like Buddhism and Stoicism, but also as well as modern psychology and cognitive behavioral therapy. We find convergence that is recognizing active open-mindedness certainly does allow one to be more sensitive and open up that active open-mindedness.
Yeah, so like we got to learn about these fallacies and biases,
Yes,
sensitize
yes,
ourselves
yes.
to that, to sensitize ourselves to the act of looking for them within our day-to-day
Yes.
cognition, and then actively counteract them and practicing with others.
Yeah,
And
to notice like our own self-deception and biases, and then do that with others,
Yeah.
so we can help each other catch them.
yeah, because one of the best ways to get yourself out of confirmation bias is to put it aside and then ask somebody else about it, and try to limit your prefacing of it. Like particularly like say
Try
a
to stay open to new information before you
well, like a song, it's like you got a recording of it and you're like, well, I like it, or I have an idea about it, but I'm too close to it right now. You give it to somebody else to listen to, but you don't tell them like, I don't know, like, the snare's hitting a little funny and this. No, you just give them to them as is. And that way they can, because there's like confirmation bias looking for, but then there's denial bias. Like, oh, I think this sucks because I just wanted to think it sucks because I'm,
you want to preload them with any information. You want to let them get a completely fresh perspective. So we want to actively counteract our biases, but we don't want to overdo that either. We don't want to reach combinatorial explosion where we are so open that we have
you'll choke.
Infinite information.
Analysis paralysis.
Make a decision. Exactly.
Or over reflecting, like we talked about when we were talking about Hamlet. He's just sitting there and over reflecting to the point where he can't move.
That's right.
He can't do.
So we want to do this to just the right degree. That's where the calibration of our relevance realization comes in. And doing this to just the right degree is what allows for the agency of wisdom.
Yeah. And wisdom being how you come about the knowledge opposed to the knowledge right?
Itself, yeah.
So what predicts how well one participates in the open-mindedness? It's, well, being good at problematizing things, and not like modern problematizing where everything's a problem. No, like being able to take this bit, find the relationship between them, find the missing pieces, fill in things. and then wonder and curiosity.
Yes, yes. To what degree is one willing to learn?
Yeah.
Because that curiosity to have more information, to solve problems, not just gather facts. So
Yeah.
there's also going to be like this kind of solution orientation.
Well, because a problem's not just a bad thing. A problem is the act of coming to a solution. First, you have a question, then you create a problem out of it, so then you can have a solution and answer to your question.
Yeah.
Ideally, right?
That's the orientation. That's the feel of curiosity. It's like you're trying to find out something for a reason.
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
just in a state of wonder with your mind wide open. And wonder is beautiful because it opens us up to see our own existentiality. Our own what is it? How do you call that? Vitality. Our own sense of you know finite nature. We are going to end one day, and we have problems that we need to solve. But just to open up to existence itself as it is, to be wide open and considerate, and then to be curious enough to solve those problems.
And I guess there has to be there has to be some kind of I don't I don't necessarily like the word incentive, but I think that's the best word I got is incentive to like why ask the question, why solve it, and more than just a casual wondering what is the incentive behind it, because like in the sciences you've got people who want to put rockets in space and have them orbit reliably around things, but then say you've got kids and you want them to live a better life than you. So how do you
incentivized by materialistic gain? Do we want to incentivize greed
or sloth, which I read something interesting about sloth.
Sense of separation, or do we want to optimize love?
Yeah.
The orientation of agape, as we've learned through this series, that kind of Christ-like love that is unconditional.
Yeah.
It's willing to look at anything before it judges it. It's willing to try and understand everything and anything that comes before it as deeply as it can, in a caring sort of way. So it's very full of care. It's a very careful, deep sort of consideration.
Yeah. And
you can't consider it deeply unless you're willing to be unconditional to something.
Yeah. And
so that orientation of love protects us. That's a proper way to incentivize ourselves, we found.
Yeah. So on sloth, and I found this interesting, reading about it the other day, and sloth isn't just the not wanting to move or do anything. It's also the not wanting to look into. It's like the opposite of wonder. Not looking into it. It's just too much work to think about that.
And you're like,
just
I don't want to do that, and you turn your brain off and having to think about it.
And dude, I've been,
that's too complicated.
I've been there. Like I watch a lot of current events and affairs and all the stuff that's going on socially, politically, spiritually, and all that stuff. And sometimes I really want to be like, screw it. I don't want to do it anymore. I don't want to look at it or anything, but I have to because I have this nagging thing that needs to know and create a problem and solve the freaking problem.
I think that it's a wise thing for us to pay attention to what's going on in our world, because we are the stewards. We are the pinnacle of evolution on this planet, and the ones with the most impact. And
we're both the ones.
We get to have a say in our evolution at this point forward, and how are we going to function with the rest of the planet and one another? Are we going to try and develop a more symbiotic nature, or are we going to continue to break apart, fragment, and divide?
Well, we're in an interesting predicament as a species. We're both the steward of our future in the world, but we're also the inheritors of this world as well. So that very much personalizes this problem, if you really think about it. And it's not just, humans got to go, or this thing's bad, get rid of it entirely, or any of that. It's like, you got to think. You personally may not be here after certain things are said and done, but humans will. So it's humans
and people that have made our
protecting.
Lives better will still be here, and their progeny, their children will be here. And
in one way or another,
how do we get smartphones and cameras and computers and things?
It wasn't just one smart person on their own. It was a whole hell of a lot of cooperation.
There's a lot of slave labor. There's a lot of really screwy mining practices and things going on that have come together for us to have access to incredible technological capacity. And the amount of money that I'm paying for a smartphone does not cover the cost, the human cost, or the earth, the damage to the earth cost.
But that doesn't mean it can't in the future. We just need to figure it out.
There's ways for us to give back with our hearts, and why not try and make this world a little bit better while we're here?
And hey, even if you're selfish, just a little bit better for you and yours. If it's truly better and actually works, it'll make it better for other people, because you won't be putting your own neuroticism and bullshit, that academic term, out in the world.
If we improve, and we self-reflect and we improve within ourselves, then the real revolution can unfurl and do what it needs to do to wrap around the world. But it's got a naturally butterfly effect out of us. Otherwise, you're right. It's like coming out of our own egoism.
Yeah.
And we're going to be trapped in that selfish mindset.
Well, and you can't feed the world if you can't feed yourself.
No.
That doesn't mean just stuff your face and let people starve. Yeah. But you gotta.
But if I want a loving world and a more considerate world, and a wiser world, and a truer, more honest world, then I've got to learn how to do that myself.
Yeah.
And I find where I still sin, I still miss the mark, I still fall short, I still give in to habits and lusts and passions in ways that make me feel ashamed as a human being. So I have a lot of growing left to do. We all do, but that, I think, is the impetus of this series, is to inspire us to start doing that again together.
Yeah, and there's a difference between a hypocrite and missing your own standards. Because we all miss our own standards. The hypocrite is the one who says it's all for everybody else and doesn't give a damn. So that's the difference. So if you're ever feeling like a hypocrite because you fell short of your standards, it's like, look, we all fall short. The fact that you have standards is a godsend. Where did these standards come from? These standards of goodness come from?
Yeah, it's
well,
good if you feel
a lot of
in yourself, because you know that you have standards.
Yeah.
And you know that there's a potential higher way for you to be.
Yeah.
And if we start to do that, boy, does it feel good.
Yeah.
It feels deeply fulfilling and meaningful. It gives our lives a sense of purpose, gives ourselves a sense of belonging and a place in this world, again, a role to act through. And every one of us can make a difference right now. And I really do believe it's down to every single one of us as individuals to begin fomenting our own awakening and let that naturally ripple out around us. And, we can find ways to heal the rifts between our spiritual systems, the rifts between spirituality and science itself, our rifts between one another and our nations, and so on and so forth.
The rifts within ourselves.
If we don't learn to do it now, then I don't know if we make it. We're not wise enough to wield the level of technology that we have access to now, and the level of intelligence that we have as a species is highly dangerous without wisdom to responsibly wield it. So this is the game right now, fam. We are learning how to generate wisdom and be in the highest, most optimal state that the human organism can be in that state of flow, that state of satori, to reach those higher states of consciousness and gain the wisdom we need to help save our planet and species from this meaning crisis. So let's do it. It's about that time.
Hey, that was a 30-minute intro on the dot. Yeah, that's right. We're getting better.
Slowly but surely.
Who's Shirley?
Guys, this is John Vervaake's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. It's a landmark lecture series. We're on episode 42 on intelligence, rationality, and wisdom. Make sure that you smash that like and subscribe button if you're enjoying the show, and do the same for John Vervaeke. Tell people about him. Let's let this wrap around the world. All right, here we go, y'all.
Welcome back to Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. So last time we were taking an in-depth look at the work of Stanovich and Rationality, because we are building towards an account of wisdom, because that is deeply intertwined with the cultivation of enlightenment, and of course with the cultivation of meaning. We noted that rationality is an existential issue. It's not just a matter of how we're processing information. It's something that is constitutive of our identity in important ways and our mode of being in the world. And we'll come back to that again. One of the core things we saw as we took a look at the rationality debate in which Stanovich's work is situated is that debate showed us a couple of important things. It showed us, if I can put this as a formula, that right? Rationality does not equal logicality, and it does not equal intelligence. That debate also showed us that we need multiple competencies when we're talking about rationality. We need an inferential competency, but we need an independent competency of construal. And then I proposed to you how we could understand what that competency is and what the normative theory is acting upon it, namely insight, good problem formulation. We then moved into what Stanovich saw as the missing piece. If intelligence doesn't give us rationality, what's the missing piece? There's two missing pieces. They overlap in some important ways. One is the notion, he calls it mindware, what I've called psychotechnology. And the other is a cognitive style. And the cognitive style that he talked about was active open-mindedness, which he gets from Jonathan Barron. And this is the idea that what you should do is cultivate a sensitivity and an ongoing awareness of the presence and effect of cognitive biases in your cognitive behavior, in your cognitive life, and to actively counteract them. I pointed out that unlike Stanovich, who doesn't emphasize this as much, Jonathan Barron, who's the originator of this idea as a constitutive feature of rationality, points out that you can't do that too much, because if you try to override too many of your cognitive biases, you of course will be also overriding them in their functioning as heuristics that help you avoid combinatorial explosion. So getting an optimal form of active open-mindedness rather than a maximal form of it is crucial to rationality. I want to just briefly stop here and be a little bit more precise about how I want to use this term. I've been using it throughout, and I basically defined it by example and then through exemplification. But I want to be a little bit clear about it because it's going to be relevant as we go forward and talk about wisdom. So here's a definition I want to offer to try and clarify what I mean and how I'm using the term psychotechnology. As I said, I don't claim to be the originator of this idea, but I am claiming that this is the particular slant I'm taking on this idea of psychotechnology. Psychotechnology is a socially generated and standardized way of formatting, manipulating, and enhancing information processing that's readily internalizable into human cognition and that can be applied in a domain general manner. That's crucial. It must extend and empower cognition in some reliable and extensive manner and be highly generalizable among people. Prototypical instances are literacy, numeracy, and graphing. So I want to just make it very clear, it's not just that anything we use mentally will count as a psychotechnology. So the cognitive style of active open-mindedness will probably make use of psychotechnologies in order to help track bias. But obviously, Stanovich means something much more comprehensive. He means a set of skills, psychotechnologies, sensibilities, and sensitivities, right, that will help you in a domain general manner note and actively respond to the presence of cognitive bias. We can then ask, what is it about people that, if intelligence is insufficient for this, what is it about people that is predictive of them acquiring this, right? Now this is learnable, right? And we talked about the need for cognition as being an important predictor. So this is the degree to which you are motivated to go out and look for problems. You're trying to find, formulate, and solve problems. So in that sense, you are generating your own instances of learning and problem solving in a quite directed and comprehensive manner. I've suggested to you that there's two ways in which we can think about this, curiosity and wisdom. I want to stop here and note something about this need for cognition that I'm now going to be making use of in today's lecture, which is the connection between the need for cognition and what Arlen calls problem finding. Because that's a very central feature, I would say an essential feature of what it is to have a high need for cognition. Arlen argues that problem finders are very good at finding problems, as the name indicates. They are able to realize problems and connect things together in ways that other people have not previously done. Some people have argued that this is central to creativity, but important for our purposes is that Arlen, and this is kind of prescient of this whole argument. She made this argument in 1990. She argues that this is central to wisdom. That one of the crucial features of being a wise person is the capacity to find problems that other people have not yet found. I want to take a moment here and offer a suggestion of how we can think about what makes somebody a good problem finder. This is not in Arlen. This is my attempt to extend and develop Arlen and make it a little bit more concrete and practicable. So I want to propose to you this idea. We don't find problems typically in a vacuum. We don't do anything in a vacuum. There's always, already a background of existing issues we're dealing with, other people are dealing with in our culture. I would suggest to you that a good problem finder can do this. Here's some existing problems in the space in which human beings are operating. And what a good problem finder does is, I think, not just simply add to that. I mean, that would be kind of a basic skill in problem solving, problem finding. But I think people that we regard as being exemplary in this and doing it very well and therefore demonstrating an aspect of creativity, it helps to explain why problem finding sort of overlaps between wisdom and creativity. They can do the following thing. They can find a problem that, if solved, would make a significant impact on these existing problems. So what I'm suggesting to you is that good problem finding is the ability to generate a problem nexus. So that if you go in and say, here's some problems in various domains, and then they are all centered on this core problem, and if we can address that core problem, then we can go back and make a significant impact on this. I think many of the people, I don't take credit for this, I think the person who should be given credit for this, and I'll talk about that later today, is Dreyfus. The idea, that many of the central problems of cognition are centered on this ability to realize relevance. I think that's very powerful kind of problem finding. It's the generation of a problem nexus, and I've tried to show you how it can be very generative of theoretical and empirical research. So I think that's part of what it is to be a good problem finder. It is to generate a problem nexus. I also want to point out something that I'm going to come back to, which is this is going to overlap with an important aspect in some current theories of the nature of understanding that have to do with the effectiveness of how we are relating to knowledge. Now that sounds very vague, and I will come back to that more carefully. What I need you to understand right now is that this problem finding, this ability to generate a problem nexus, will also make a significant impact, interact with some of the best accounts, I think, that are emerging about the nature of understanding. And that's going to be important because we want understanding to be part of our theory, our account of wisdom. Now I want to come back to the affective side of this. So I've suggested to you that one part of good problem finding, one part of need for cognition, is good problem finding. And then good problem finding is the ability to generate a problem nexus. But need for cognition, look at this word here, right? Also points to obviously an affective, a motivational component. And this takes us into the two things I talked about before, wonder and curiosity. And I propose to you that although these terms are slippery, one way in which we can pick up sort of polar opposites is that curiosity is much more in the having mode. It's much more about manipulating and controlling things. And wonder is much more in the being mode. It's much more about encountering mystery and calling into question one's worldview, one's identity, etc. So that's why wonder can shade into awe or potentially even into horror. Now I want to pick up on something here because this again has some very deep connections to wisdom. So I actually have this on a plaque in my apartment. It's a famous quote from Socrates, which is, "Wisdom begins in wonder." Wisdom begins in wonder. And like everything about Socrates, it is simultaneously provocative and enigmatic as to what did Socrates actually mean by that. And there's two different interpretations. And you can see this in the different ways in which wonder is treated by Plato and, of course, by Aristotle. You can see this in this sort of distinction to some of the current work on wonder. But for Plato, the point of philosophy is to develop and extend that sense of wonder. So that what you're actually trying to do for Plato is you're trying to deepen wonder into awe. Because he feels that this awe will have the greatest capacity for transforming us, for getting us deeply involved in the anagogic ascent. That makes sense. Aristotle also thinks that philosophy begins in wonder, but I think you could make a good case that, and many people have, right, that Aristotle sees this more in line with curiosity, trying to figure things out. And that what you're ultimately doing, I would say for Aristotle, is this. You're trying to basically shape wonder into curiosity in philosophy and then resolve the curiosity in some answer to some question. So for Plato, wonder sets you on a quest of anagoge. But for Aristotle, wonder gets you to formulate questions that you then answer. And that's a fundamental difference between them. And it's interesting because, you see, Plato is here sort of pushing for meta-accommodation, as we've seen before when we talked about this, when we talked about, right, the numinous. And Aristotle is, of course, pushing for meta-assimilation. Of course, when I answer questions, it may force me to do conceptual accommodation, but overall, this is trying to stabilize, right, and assimilate and sort of home things for you. The kind of stuff we saw in Garrett. So philosophy is working within that whole structure. And why am I pointing this out? Because, of course, again, we're invoking this higher order relevance realization that's at work within this need for cognition, within wonder and curiosity. All right. So we saw that Stanovich was able to respond to many of the defenders of human rationality in the rationality debate. He was able to respond to Cohen by crucially noting that we have to challenge Cohen's assumptions. We do not have a single competence. Well, I also added in that we shouldn't think of it as static or completely individual. Right? He was able to respond to Cherniak by pointing out that Cherniak was quite right about the centrality of dealing with computational limitations, but that what Cherniak is really giving is not a theory, because Cherniak's theory is a theory of relevance realization, is not a theory of rationality, but a theory of intelligence, something that Stanovich also agrees with. And then to Smedslund, Stanovich acknowledges that we need an independent normativity on construal, and we've already seen that we can answer that, well, at least I'm proposing that we can answer that by a different area in psychology, which is the work on good problem formulation and insight, a problem formulation that avoids combinatorial explosion, ill-definedness, and the way in which we can be misdirected by salience to misjudge what is relevant.
We back.
We had mic issues earlier. Sorry about that, guys.
Yeah, if you guys couldn't hear
All right,
me well, apologies.
Wait. Say something.
Check.
Hey, we're both here.
Hey, it's working.
All right.
Sounds
Sorry.
good. Sounds good.
Man.
Yeah, so I was still coming through DJ's mic, apparently.
Yeah, sorry about that. Still figuring stuff out. We don't have a dedicated sound person, nor do we have a lot of the other stuff that makes it a lot easier. We're working with, now mind you, I'm not crapping on the Soundcraft board because it's a very nice board, but it's still meant for live.
Look forward to an upgraded podcast very soon.
Yeah.
We're going to have new mics, new cameras. It's going to be nice.
All right, so I missed a little bit of the beginning there. I came in at the point where he's talking about literacy, numeracy, graphing, and then Stanovich, if intelligence is insufficient, what is it that allows for understanding active open-mindedness? There's some stuff before that
just a little bit. So basically in this episode we're talking about how intelligence is not equal to rationality. Rationality is not equal to logicality. And then we are refreshed on what a psychotechnology is. Psychotechnology is basically any kind of technique of the mind, language, mathematics, things like that are psychotechnologies.
So literacy, numeracy, stuff like that, yeah.
A psychotech is a socially developed and standardized technique that's used in a way that sustains and empowers human cognition, and it's also highly accessible and usable by broad numbers of people. So anything that we use in our minds, sets of skills and sensitivities that help us in a domain general manner to catch cognitive biases as well. So that's what we need. We need something for this active open-mindedness to really help refine and tune it. We recognize that cognition, by which we have curiosity and wisdom, gives us a motivation to look for and solve problems, self-directed. Now, problem finders are really good at realizing problems and connecting the dots, connecting things that others haven't. And Arlen noted that this is central to wisdom. Now, Vervaeke's proposition is that we don't find problems in a vacuum. A good problem finder finds problems that, if solved, have impacts on other connected problems. So basically,
the problem nexus.
Yes, a good problem solver generates a good problem matrix and then recognizes the nexus within that matrix. It catches the core problems that connects to the other problems. So a good nexus finder has great problem solving capacity. Then
actually, that's interesting. So like, you can imagine people like this. So the people who are like consultants. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's what they're doing.
That's right.
They're finding the core problems to your matrix of problems, and this is where the nexus of your problems.
Yes.
So then you can deal with this problem that'll help you deal with the rest instead of chasing your own tail around.
It seems that's precisely what Vervaeke's done with this series. Sure. He's recognizing the meaning crisis as the nexus of the many myriad existential crises that are part of what we now call the meta crisis.
Well, and even within these extended debate, I'll call them extended debates that are happening between philosophers and scientists here that he's going through, he's also finding the core issues within the arguments being made. The herald, if you will, if you want to go what do they call that? Dialogos on it. He's heralding. He's like, okay, here's this central problem. If this and this guy says this and this and this, and they're all kind of right in their own way, then there seems like there's something here. Here's another person who talked a little bit on that, and then expands upon that, and and what's the word? Explicates.
Yes.
the core issues, thus pointing to even more core issues. So the need for cognition.
Yes.
So
yes.
there's
So we have wonder, which is of the being mode. It's
well,
done for its own sake. Curiosity comes from the having mode, which is the part that wants to
Yeah,
have and own and feel senses of need. You know, the having mode gets us food, water, and shelter, but our sense of wonder helps us maximize our own inner potential.
and you participate in wonder and being wonderful, if you will, opposed to curiosity. I have a curious thought, if you will. So this is a quote from Socrates: "Wisdom begins in wonder," and he went to two interpretations of this. Plato's interpretation: the point of philosophy is to develop and extend the sense of wonder
And to deepen that wonder into awe.
Yeah, thus getting us involved in this
Transformation, self-transformation,
this
the
ascent.
anagogic ascent. It's seen as like a quest that you're taking on
So this
when you
is-
come from the mode of wonder.
what is meta accommodation.
Meta accommodation, yes.
And then the second interpretation is Aristotle's interpretation, which is similar, but it's to shape wonder into curiosity and then resolve it,
Yes.
thus stabilizing it. So meta assimilation is, assimilating it. So there's which is question. So Plato's interpretation was the quest, and Aristotle's is the question. And actually, the word quest is in question, which is interesting.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, I never really thought of it before, but I'm like, as I'm writing this, and that's all I got for the notes. That all seems to square.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah,
So-
so that's the philosophy of wonder right there between Aristotle and Plato.
Yeah.
Aristotle's trying to stabilize, to have. It's coming from having mode.
Yeah.
Plato is trying to be
Yeah.
on a quest in an anagogic ascent within oneself.
I like both interpretations,
Both are
and I
helpful.
find both are useful, but it really makes sense of, like, the point of sitting down and talking philosophy and doing this. It can seem very hoity-toity and high-minded, but it's to develop a sense of awe and, like, whoa,
Yes,
like, oh,
and to
get
share
you-
that together.
and get you into it.
Yes.
And whereas Aristotle's is yes, get you into it, but to resolve, say, a question, or to have a resolution to it, to stabilize again, which you could take Plato's, and that would be the one half of the self-organizing criticality. The sand building up, and then
Oh yeah,
breaking
yeah.
down and then forming the base again and building up. So both interpretations are like the two parts of that cycle.
Yes. Yes. That makes sense. Yeah, because everything's it's like that. It's like the relevance realization is this constant calibration. It's always both sides of this polarity that are actually playing together in opponent processing. They need each other to help us calibrate, focus in on whatever we're trying to do. So that catches us up, fam. We're gonna jump back in now to John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, episode 42. Let's go.
Let's go.
I now want to return to Stanovich's theory properly. What's his positive account of what rationality is? So the way Stanovich does this, and the way he's doing this overlaps with a lot of other work, and this is a point that he himself makes. There's a lot of convergence in psychology on the idea of a dual processing theory, that we have multiple competencies. Now, what this dual processing is itself very controversial. Initially, people talked about two systems, and then they talked about two styles, and because of critiques, it was hard to maintain those terms. And I'm not even convinced that they are, that they're distinct things. They might lie on a continuum. But the basic idea, so to avoid all that controversy, they're simply called S1 and S2. Right? And like I say, I'm not claiming that they're discrete systems or even discrete styles. It's quite possible that they are polar positions within a continuum of processing. I'm going to put all of that aside because it's not relevant for what we're talking about here, right? So the main idea here is that these are different ways in which you process information. And this process works largely intuitively, and it works very much in a highly associational fashion. Right. It makes use of a lot of implicit processing, and it's very fast. Right? It's very fast. So this is the kind of processing that you're using all the time in what we've, when we talked about this when Varela talked about your ability to cope. This is your coping, right? So when I'm moving around the environment, I'm relying a lot on my intuitive knowledge, my capacity for implicit learning, the way I can quickly associate things together, right? And so I would add to this, of course, as I argued before, that this is also sort of how we're primarily caring for things, being involved with them, finding them salient, etc. But nevertheless, this is the part of your cognition that is operating a lot of the time in the background. In fact, I'm going to step aside from Stanovich for a moment and propose to you that instead of thinking of these as discrete systems, we can think of different states where you're in, where one style or other is more foregrounded and the other is more backgrounded. So I'll come back to that. Let's do what's S2? Well, S2 operates more deliberately, in both senses of the word, like deliberation, where I'm engaging in reflection, and deliberate in the sense that I am aware of it and intentionally directed in it. So it's deliberately, right? So it tends to not work associationally, it tends to work inferentially, argumentatively. Right? Argumentation, in the philosophical sense, not in the sense of having an emotional conflict with somebody. The processing, of course, all processing has, and this is an important point, some aspects of it that are implicit. So this is more of a contrast of emphasis. But this processing is much more explicit. And it tends to be very slow. So Kahneman has a book out right now, Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow, that is a very good sort of discussion of this dual processing model, because, as I said, there's a lot of theoretical argumentation and evidence that is convergent on this. So this is a very highly plausible thing, and you see it showing up in many, many different domains within psychology. All right. So one way of thinking about this, and this is a way in which Stanovich and Evans have tried to get a clearer, more precise way of distinguishing the two, is the degree to which they're making use of working memory. So the idea is S2 really relies on working memory, whereas S1 relies much less on it. And so it's much more automatic in that sense in its operation. So let's take an example where you use the two systems, right? So you're grocery shopping, and you come up to the cashier, and they're ringing you in, and you've got a normal sort of basket full of normal groceries, and the cashier says to you, well, that'll be $1,000, please. And you go, what? Now, where did that what come from? Right? Where did that what come from? Well, you have associations between sort of these objects, their prices, sort of the amount. You've picked up implicit patterns, right? Notice how intuitively, associationally, implicit, and quickly you just, what? That's wrong. It can't be $1,000. That makes no sense. So you call the cashier into question by using your S1 processing. Now, what the cashier has to do, right, though, she or he can't just respond this way to you. The cashier can't go, nah, it's 1,000. I can sense it. What does they have to do? They have to deliberately, they have to take out each thing, they have to get out the bill, they have to deliberately, right, notice they have to concentrate, they have to pay attention step by step, make the argument to you explicitly and slowly. No, look, Look at this matches this They're using S2 processing. Okay? Now these, of course, are in a trade-off relationship because the problem with, and this, of course, is, and Stanovich acknowledges this, but, right, part of the problem with this is how much demand it puts on your working memory, how slow it is. So you cannot rely on it. Yet another argument why you can't Descartes your way through your whole of your existence, right? You can't rely on it for most of your behavior because you will just head into the ocean of combinatorial explosion. You will get so slowed down and so overwhelmed that you won't be able to live your life. You'll commit cognitive suicide. But of course, we have this for a reason. We have this because it is supposed to override to a degree this. So notice that these two systems are in basically an opponent relationship. They are both working towards the same goal of making you adaptive, but they tend to work in opposite fashions. And Stanovich sees S2 as largely having, and there's deep truth to this, having a corrective function for S1. All right. So now I can first give you his theory of foolishness, which he understands as disrationalia, like dyslexia. All right. And then by implication, his theory of rationality, which, because it's a comprehensive kind of rationality that deals with a comprehensive kind of foolishness, it's now bordering on an account of what wisdom is. So here's the idea. What is active open-mindedness doing? Well, what's happening is this is the place where, you know, all the heuristics and biases are. This is where they're operating. And what happens here is they make you leap to conclusions. Remember when I did the problem with you, you know, where you've got the pond, and on day 1 there's so many lily pads and it doubles every day, and on day 20 it's done. On what day was the pond half covered? And your S1 shouts at you, 10 days in, because it's half, and that's how it works. And that's wrong, because on day 19, half the pond was covered, right? And what you have to do is, S2 has to basically override how you're leaping to conclusions. How you leap to the conclusion that the people at the airport are in danger because of the representative heuristic or the availability heuristic. So S1 is constantly giving, but I need this. That's what makes me fast. If I'm not leaping, I'm not fast. I'm not coping. Leaping and coping are deeply interdependent. Okay? But the thing is, sometimes, and again, it's unclear what the degree is. That's one of the ways in which I think Barron is a little bit more clear than Stanovich. But sometimes we need to override this leaping to conclusion. So he sees that what active open-mindedness is basically doing is teaching you to protect this processing from being overridden by the way S1 makes you leap to conclusions. You are foolish, you have disrationalia, if you are highly intelligent and yet you have not trained S2, right, to be properly protected from the interference from S1. Do you see what's going on here? This is how he's ultimately responding to Cohen. You have these two competencies. You need both of them. They are constitutive of your cognitive agency. So they're both constitutive competences. But this one can interfere with this one, and that can cause you to behave irrationally. What active open-mindedness does is to protect this kind of processing from that interference. So that's Stanovich's central model. Now, I think that's definitely a good account of active open-mindedness. My central criticism of this is I think it's an insufficient account of rationality. It's insufficient. I grant a lot of work has been done here. Rationality is not being equated to intelligence. It's not being equated to logicality. It's centered on overcoming self-deception. There's an account of self-deception. It's so Platonic, eh? It's so Platonic. Here's the monster, and it's interfering with the man, right? So Platonic. And so we get that interference effect. That's what's causing us to be foolish. That makes us self-deceptive. If we cultivate active open-mindedness, then we can reduce the interference, and that makes us more comprehensively rational. I think that's all, well, it's all elegant. It's beautiful. And the fact that this kind of work keeps getting replicated and massively convergent, it's so highly plausible and profound. That's all, I think that's all worthy of being noted. However, let's look to this. Because is leaping always a bad thing? Well, I already implied you need to leap to cope, but let's take a look, right, at the work of Baker, Sennett, and Ceci from 1996. Okay? So they investigated a thing they called inductive leaping. I think calling it inductive leaping is a mistake because I understand induction as an inferential procedure, and what they're explicitly doing is not inferential nature, but it is not inferential in nature. So I'm going to suggest that we don't use that term, and I'm instead going to use the more neutral term of cognitive leaping. What's cognitive leaping? Well, cognitive leaping, how did they test it? They tested it in the following ways. I give you various patterns that are unfolding across time, and that, right, at various times I stop and I ask you if you can tell me what it's going to be. One version of it is there's, like we talked about this before, I'm a bunch of dots, and what's it going to be, and more dots get filled in. Eventually you're able to leap and say, oh, it's going to turn out to be a sofa. And notice how you're doing a gestalt, you're going from features to gestalt, you're doing that leap, and you're going from looking at the dots to looking through them, you're doing an opacity transparency shift, all that stuff we talked about, right? Mindfulness is involved. Now, why does that matter? Well, what they found was something very important. This allowed them to operationalize kind of at least an aspect of the inevitability of insight. Because often you don't know what's going on in an insight. There's this leap. And how they operationalized it was this. You're a good leaper if you can use fewer cues and accurately say what the final pattern is going to be. So if you use fewer cues and you're making lots of mistakes, you're not very good. If you're largely accurate but you have to get a whole bunch of cues, then you're not a very good leaper. But if you use few cues and get to the full gestalt reliably, right, then you're a very good cognitive leaper. Okay. You're doing this, you have this skill, this facility with pattern detection, pattern completion. Why is that so important? Well, because that's what the experiment showed, this is directly predictive of insight. The better you are at leaping, the better you are at insight. So do you see the tension here? If I try to shut off too much leaping to conclusions, I'm also shutting off the machinery that makes me more insightful. It's right, we have to give up simplistic notions, naive, simplistic notions of rationality. Okay, I'm not accusing Stanovich of this, not at all. But what I'm saying is, we have to, being rational is a very complex process in which there are trade-off relationships and a very complicated kind of optimization needs to be trained. So, we want active open-mindedness to, let's make this the error of interference. So, sometimes I leap to conclusions and that causes a lot of mistake in inference, the kind of stuff that Stanovich, and what I need is active open-mindedness to moderate that and ameliorate it in a significant degree. Right? But I want to leap to insight. And I need that for good construal, and good construal is central to being a problem solver, central to being rational. So what do I need? Well, it's interesting because if you turn to a domain outside of the academic domain, and right? We have to, because rationality is existential, we have to pay attention to the context even in which we're theorizing about rationality, right? And if we're in a largely academic context, we're going to think of rationality as primarily about theorizing. And so this is a great danger to theorizing. And so I would argue, if the project you're engaging in rationality is the project of theorizing, and I mean that broadly in the sense of generating scientific, or historical theory, right, then active open-mindedness is crucial. But there are domains where it goes the other way. There's domains in which what you need, right, is you need to be able to come up with a transformative insight, where you need a radical reconstrual of the problem or the issue, where that's crucial because you're somehow locked in. Where's the domain and where that's crucial? Well, we've talked about it. So this is good for theorizing. But Jacobs, in his book, and you can see some related work by Teasdale, points out there's an opposite context. There's the context not of theory, but there's the context of therapy. Right? I think it's broader than this, but I'm using this because it's a good contrast, and there's an alliterative relation to help for mnemonic purposes. So in therapy, very often what's needed is, and we've talked about this, remember, you're existentially trapped, and you need this fundamental kind of transformative insight, and you cannot infer your way through it. We've already tackled that argument in detail. You cannot infer your way through it. And the problem in therapy is people try to think their way through it. That's Jacobs' main point, and I say a book called The Ancestral Mind. And the same point is being made, I think, by Teasdale when he talks about metacognitive insight being central to therapy. Right? Often what you need is to try and shut this down, try to trigger this. Think of Freud and free association. Right? You have to try and shut this down, prevent it from interfering, right? Bring this into the foreground. Keep this in the background. So when we're theorizing, we need this in the foreground and we need it protected. We need it to seriously background and constrain this, active open-mindedness in doing this. But in the therapeutic situation, this needs to be much more foregrounded, this needs to be backgrounded, and it needs to be constrained so it doesn't unduly interfere with this. Now, what we can ask ourselves is, well, what's a cognitive style, right, that makes this much more focal, tries to constrain this, and really improves insight? Well, we know what that is. And Teasdale, in fact, argues for it explicitly as what triggers metacognitive insight. That's mindfulness. See, think about how much in a mindfulness practice, I've tried to argue that we need an ecology of psychotechnologies to cultivate the cognitive style of mindfulness, right? Think of meditation. Think of how much in meditation you are trying to, right, really constrain this, shut this down, reduce all that inner speech, all that inferential processing, the deliberate direction, right? And you're trying to open this up in a very powerful way. So notice that I now have, right, a cognitive style that is, in a very important sense, opponent, not adversarial, but opponent to active open-mindedness. Notice that they are both sharing the training of attention and what you're paying attention to and how you're paying attention. So this is great for planning. And this, as I said, this is great for coping. And especially when the planning is epistemic, when we're trying to theorize, when we're planning for truth. This is very good for coping, especially when we're doing a kind of coping that's therapeutic in a broad sense, in which we are needing to transform and undergo important qualitative development. So I think what's missing from Stanovich is a broader account of our competences and how they can how they are played off against each other, how there's a trade-off relationship with them. And part of what I would argue, and I'm going to come back to this more directly later, what goes into wisdom is a cultivation of both active open-mindedness for inference and mindfulness for insight. And then what we're going to need is, well, what coordinates them together? How are they coordinated together? How do I optimize the opponent, not adversarial, how do I optimize the opponent processing between them? I want to come back to that and explore that in detail with you.
Yo, yo, yo. Break time. So we're going to cover that past 15, 20 minutes now. And catch ourselves up.
All right, let me see.
So we're looking for, Stanovich was looking for a positive account of rationality.
So the dual processing.
We notice lots of convergence around this dual processing theory that recognizes different ways of processing information that we have. We have this S1 system and this S2 system.
So, and before we get into that, Vervaeke made it pretty clear that, you know, he's trying to get at how they're not separate, discrete things, like what Stanovich is, I don't want to say alluded to, but where his point was at. So what we're doing now is...
Yeah, Vervaeke's adding a little spin to this theory of his own now.
Yeah.
And recognizing that these appear to be in an opponent processing. This is another part of the relevance realizations calibration process.
So S1 is your intuitive, implicit processing. It's fast.
Yeah.
It's a coping.
It's associative.
It's involved in salient.
Salient landscaping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. And then S2 is very deliberate, inferential, argumentative, but not in the sense of, you know, arguing with somebody. But
Not personally, but informationally within oneself. Yeah.
It's explicit and slow. So
Yep.
that is your working memory side, and then the S1 is your automatic side. So it's leaping versus sitting and thinking.
That's right. The S2 is much more working memory reliant. The S1 processing is much more automatic and intuitive within us. It requires less, we could say it's less reliant on working memory. And it certainly is much more about coping and caring kind of orientation to it. Where the S2 is more like very focused, directed.
Yeah. So,
you know, in its own way, looking for truth, basically.
Yeah. So the example he gave is, you know, like you go to the grocery store, you get, you know, your normal whatever bread, milk, eggs, and the cashier says, "Oh, $1,000," and you're like, "What?" And that immediate "what" is your S1, your intuitive going, no.
Yeah.
No, hold on, you know, and before thinking of. This is before thinking of, normally this only cost me $15 or however much. It's a very immediate, just like, what?
That's right.
And then what the cashier has to do is S2, very deliberately go through each, you know, this thing costs this much and this costs this much and this costs this much. So but that takes a really long time.
That takes a lot longer, but the S1 it's intuitive and it's very immediate. It's very fast.
Yeah, so what S2 is doing for S1 is overriding S1 in a corrective manner.
It has a corrective function to it.
Yeah, because, you know, okay, instead of saying $1,000, it's like, you know, you come back a month and buy the same stuff that cost you $75 and now it costs $150.
Yeah.
And then you go through the receipt and you're like, damn, it actually is that much.
Yeah. Yeah, and so the S2 is verifying. It's really good at checking. You know, we can't rely on S2 all the time for most behavior because it's so slow. Yeah. But the S2 is very important. It can help check and override the S1 processing in an opponent processing relationship, which, as Vervaeke notes, is not adversarial. It's merely a trade-off relationship that it's just like a camera lens can focus in and, you know, zoom in and zoom out to maintain the optimal focus. It's just in an opponent processing relationship. So S2 has this corrective function, And yeah, go ahead there.
The dance between the two is what is it? The open-mindedness, the active
Active
open-mindedness.
open-mindedness.
That's what it's doing. It's it's mediating between the shouting at you, just leaping and what overrides the leaping to conclusions. And
Yeah, so it's both what allows us to leap to conclusions and then what can also check them.
So
it's that whole process.
Yeah, so Vervaeke's criticism of this is it's really not enough, because in some cases leaping isn't a bad thing, and he uses his term cognitive leaping, which there's tests for. You show a bunch of patterns that are building into something, and you stop and you ask them what's it supposed to be, what's the next thing. So in the case, there's a bunch of dots making a couch, and if you're good at that and reliable, then you're a good leaper, and we need to be good leapers.
Yeah, if you can see just very few cues and infer properly or reliably, then your pattern recognition to pattern completion is on point. To be better at leaping is to be better at insight and thus rationality. If we cut off the leaping entirely, we lose our capacity for rationality, which requires so much insight. So there's these trade-off relations, and they're very complex optimizations that we can go through to increase our capacity for wisdom here. And now let me back up a little bit. So active open-mindedness, it's teaching us to protect processing from being overridden complete all the time by our capacity for self-deception, basically. So we need both competencies for cognition to function properly. Leaping to conclusions, not always bad. It helps us move fast. Inductive leaping is perhaps a mistaken term. That's where Vervaeke gives us the cognitive leapings that kind of
and
stitches things together a little bit.
So S1 and S2 are both good in two different ends, and those are theory and therapy, right? So in the therapy end, oh, here, hold on, wrong page. Let me get to that.
Well, so basically, there are existential implications, and that's why this isn't just used for theorizing. It can be used for therapy as well, and we need to recognize that.
Well, so like in therapy, you don't want to be in S2 mind because you don't talk yourself through.
Yeah, we want to see rationality beyond theorizing.
Yeah,
because rationality is used for our own existence, for our own inner lives as well.
Then we also need to be able to properly theorize as well, and much like your autonomic nervous system that stimulates you optimally depending on the circumstance. I guess active open-mindedness is like that.
Meditation is one aspect of mindfulness practices that help us be more actively aware, so we can catch ourselves as we're watching that open-minded process go on. We can be active and catch it when it's too open-minded, because overleaping can lead to missed inferences. So we need good control, and thus we need to be able to see that rationality is beyond just theorizing, and know when to foreground S2 for theorizing or foreground S1 for personal self-growth and transformation.
Yeah, we need a better Stanovich as well as us need a better account of the trade-off relationship.
That's right, because it has existential implications.
Yeah, so we need to optimize this opponent processing relationship, because it's not about maximizing or minimizing. It's about depending on the circumstance. If you're in therapy, you need to be a little bit more
how much to zoom in or how much to zoom out. That's right.
If you need to create a theory about, I don't know, something fancy, some science stuff, you kind of need to be S2. You need to take your time, work through it deliberately, but sometimes that S1 allows you to leap and be like, I see the pattern.
That's
Let
right.
me jump into this as well.
Yeah, beyond, so S1, beyond therapy, is therapy, which we can't infer. We can't think through to solve something that's a therapeutic issue. In therapy, we need to shut down the S2 process in large part, put it in the background and constrain it to foreground the S1. And then we need to do the opposite for theorizing, like you were saying. We need to be able to put the S1 in the background so that we can deliberately go through the data and check our calculations.
And it's backgrounded, not gotten rid of,
That's right.
Like even, a picture, there's things in the foreground and things in the background. Without the background, the foreground
just like
make
you
much
constrain
sense.
your eyes when you're trying to see something in low light. It's the same thing. So mindfulness practices, meditation is something that helps us develop our overall mindfulness. Meditation constrains the S2 processing to open up our S1 processing in a powerful way. And that's so meditation we would call a cognitive style that helps aid in mindfulness.
And the opposite end of that would be contemplation, if we're talking, way back to the beginning in the non-dual state, and scaling up and scaling down of your attention. The other end would be contemplation, where you focus on your S2.
Yes.
Deliberately go through it, and, but you need to be doing both. I won't say at the same time, but at the same time in appropriate amounts for what you're trying to do. So if you're actually trying to get yourself out of the rut of overthinking and all that stuff, well, go meditate. Go do that, because
But if you're having trouble connecting with the wider world, go out to a temple or to a church and contemplate. The word temple is right there, and contemplate. It's like a collective. Well, in the case of a church or a temple, it is a collective communion with the outer reality, and reverence in a reverential sort of way.
Yep.
So
up and out and down and in.
So there's the out, there's the in. That's it. The opponent processing is all over the place here. So we see relevance realization everywhere. This is so cool. So S2 is really good for planning and when you're aiming for truth, when you're theorizing. S1's great for coping with situations, caring that you care about, when we need to transform and develop ourselves qualitatively.
Yeah. So that word
quality-wise.
Coping is an interesting word, because so there's something called a coping saw. It's a very narrow blade, and what it's used for is when you're putting in molding, you're able to cut around things and the saw fits within the cut in the shape that you need to cut. So the thing you're putting in fits in. Coping is a way that we mold ourselves to fit, if you will.
Yeah.
It's just interesting how the words
work.
Like
we conform to reality.
And
when you over-conform, we have a term for that, conformist, which has a negative connotation, but we're always trying to conform ourselves to reality in a way that allows for the furthering of our organism.
Yeah, because you could
you need to be able to do that to cope with reality.
Yeah, to cope with reality, and in the negative way of it's my coping mechanism.
It's a cope. Yeah.
Well, why are you doing that? Okay, because there's something that happened or a stimulus or something that
we have a term for that.
With.
Yeah.
And you need to wrap yourself around it.
That's right.
Or shy away from it.
And when people are overdoing that more than they need to, we call it a cope.
Yeah.
That's interesting. How we have these social ways of picking up on the errors that we can make.
They say Jesus was a carpenter, or at least his dad was. Some say they're stonemasons, but either way, it's funny how words work. Coping, molding. It doesn't seem like it'd be real. Why do they call it a coping saw? I don't know. I may be wrong, but there's something core to that word.
No, you're right, because it helps you conform and fit too. Yeah, you're right.
And particularly in corners or where things join.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know either.
Agent
That's
arena.
Cool though. That's an interesting thought there. All right, guys, we are jumping back in to episode 42 of John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. Let's go.
Because I can't push this any farther, because as we push this farther, we're getting farther and farther away from Stanovich's theory and moving in towards a theory that I myself am going to propose to you, the work I've done with Leo Ferraro, and then sort of critically reflect on that. So I need you to remember this for when we come back to more explicitly talk about a theory of wisdom. And to be fair to Stanovich, he's ultimately not offering a theory of wisdom. And I think when he talks about rationality, he really means theoretical rationality, as opposed to what we might call practical or therapeutic rationality. Okay, I want to stop here, though, and note it and continue on with our investigation now of explicit theories of wisdom. But I want to sort of pull one thing out of our discussion from Stanovich before we leave Stanovich's good company. And I want to use somebody else's work to extend that a bit and to just add more teeth to this claim that rationality is ultimately an existential issue. A way of understanding what Stanovich says is the following, right? When I use intelligence to learn the psychotech and the cognitive style. I can use intelligence to actually improve how I'm using my intelligence. I can use my intelligence to improve, right, how the competencies are optimizing, and I can therefore overall enhance my capacity for relevance realization. We can think of that as rationality. But something else is emerging, right, out of this, which I'm only suggesting now, but we may perhaps be able to use our rationality to improve our rationality, to make it more optimal overall. And I would suggest to you that's going to be crucial to wisdom. That's going to be an essential feature, I would argue. Not everybody agrees with me on this. I'm trying to be really clear about this. But I would argue that that is a place in which we can find the locus for understanding the nature of wisdom, how it relates to rationality and how it relates to intelligence. What the nature of this is, we're going to have to come back to one more time. Please remember when you see this word that I am not equating it to logicality or intelligence. I've given you long arguments about it. I've tried to expand this notion. Right? It's as much more about the reliable and systematic ability to overcome self-deception and to afford the enhancement of development and meaning in life. That's what I mean by it. Okay, so let's keep this in mind. Let's take some time now, right, to take a look at some more explicit theories of wisdom. I can't look at them all. This is a growth industry. I'm going to a conference tomorrow that has a lot of the people that are working in this, and it's going to be a discussion to try and see if we can come to some consensus about this, precisely because it is such an important topic. A lot of good work has been done on it, but again, because there is such a multitude of viewpoints, getting a clear consensus on this is going to be a theoretical challenge. Okay. Now, I want to, as I said, do one more thing before I do that, before I move to the explicit theories, and I want to show you a bit about this. And the point about this is to bring out something that Stanovich is not addressing, which is the existential aspect of rationality, the degree to which we identify with our higher cognitive processes. Okay, so this is the work of Dweck, Carol Dweck, and it's work on mindset. She has a book entitled that. And this, of course, is, again, an ongoing thing. It's been taken up in a lot of different research. So I want to describe an experiment to you. And then I want to sort of challenge a little bit a potential ambiguity or confusion in Dweck that I think we can clarify by making use of this work from Stanovich. So Dweck did the following thing. She brought, she has a whole bunch of experiments, but let's talk about one. She brought in a bunch of school children and she randomly assigned them to three groups, Group A, Group B, and Group C. Okay. Now, Dweck talks about two different ways in which you can set your mind towards your traits. And the trait that's really crucial here, and this is relevant, is intelligence. So she talks about two views you can have, two ways in which you can set your mind. Now, it's a mindset because it's not just a belief, it's the way in which you're identifying with, right? It's the way in which you feel you are embodying the traits we're talking about. So you can have a fixed view of your intelligence or a malleable view. Okay? And so in the fixed view, you think intelligence is like fixed basically at sort of birth or early on, and then once it's locked in, there's not much you can do with it. So for example, my height is a fixed trait. There's not a lot I can do to modify it. It's a fixed trait, okay? My weight is a much more malleable trait. I can change, it's quite variable, it can change quite a bit. So you may think that intelligence is more like my height, you're sort of born with it, you're fixed, you got this number assigned and that's it. Or intelligence is malleable, it can develop and change. Now, notice your behavior is going to be different if you think intelligence is fixed. If you think intelligence is fixed, your attitude towards error is that error will reveal that you have a defect in a non-changeable trait. It'll reveal, it'll permanently disclose that you're not smart. So fixed intelligence tends to turn error into permanent revelation. Right? If I make mistakes, that will show that I have low intelligence. And once everybody knows that, including myself, there's nothing I can do about it. And then I'm doomed to being a stupid person. Okay? If you have the malleable view of intelligence, error doesn't do that for you. Error is now, oh wait, error points towards the skills I'm using. I need better skills, or the effort I'm putting in. I need to put in more effort. Because if it's malleable, I can do things to change it. So the error is basically pointing, you need to make some changes. You need to cultivate more skills. You need to cultivate more effort. Now notice something right away, please. Notice how the fixed view focuses you on the product, right? It focuses you on, right? You just get fixated on the error. Oh no! This focuses you, remember the key of rationality? It focuses you on the process. The process. Okay, so she has a lot of experiments showing that, right, the fixed view and the malleable view have a huge impact on your behavior. But interesting thing, the way, how can you trigger people into this mode? Well, if you're in sort of an authority position, like being a teacher at a school, the one way you can trigger the mode, and this is really a mode, right? The mode that people are in is how you praise them, the kind of feedback you give them. If I praise you using trait language, like you're so smart, you're so bright, that's going to tend to trigger this orientation. If I praise you for the process, wow, you're using a really good skill, you're putting in a lot of effort for that, that's going to make the process salient to you. The more I make this salient, the more you're going to be in that mode. The more I make this salient, the more you're going to be in that mode. Okay, so I can praise the trait, right? Or I can praise the process. Think about how important this is to parenting or schooling. Okay, so let's go back to the experiment. We have these three groups. The C group is the control group. They're all given a set of problems that have been pre-tested for, I think they were grade 4. They could all solve these problems. They're challenging, but they're all solvable. And they all solve them. So all groups solve them, but group A is praised for its trait. Group B is praised for the process, and then group C is given the neutral just acknowledgement of, oh, the praise is, you succeeded so well in that problem, okay? So neutral. So the idea is this is going to trigger, right, these people into the fixed view. This is going to trigger people into the malleable view. So now what you do is you give the kids a bunch of tests. You ask which ones want to take on some more challenging problems. Notice what I'm doing here. I'm looking for need for cognition, looking for need for cognition. And what I find is this group, yeah. Oh, sorry, that was completely wrong. This group says, no, I don't want to try harder problems. Why? Because if they try harder problems, there's a very good chance that they will generate error, and then error will generate, right, the recognition that they're less intelligent, and then they're permanently stained with that, permanently marked. The process people say, yeah, I'd like to try harder problems, they have a need for cognition. Seems to be triggered, of course, neutral, right? Then you give them some harder problems and ask, do they enjoy them or not? Do not enjoy this. Yeah, I enjoy this, neutral. Right? Now, here's the crucial thing. Now you give them a set of problems that were equal in difficulty to the first set of problems. You give them a set of problems that were equal in difficulty to the first set of problems. This has all been massively pre-tested, so it's safe, right? And what you find is this group does about the same, this group does much worse, and this group does better than it did before. And now I want to extend this, and notice how this is starting to fold into a kind of self-deception, right? You ask these kids to write to, I believe the experiment was done in America. You ask these people to write to a student in Germany that they will never meet, by the way, and report how they did on the experiment. So these two groups, right, largely tell the truth. They just, 40% of these people lie about their performance. Okay. What am I trying to show you? I'm trying to show you the way you frame yourself, the way you identify with your processing has a huge impact on your problem-solving ability, your proclivity for self-deception, and your need for cognition. Rationality is an existential thing. It is not just an informational processing thing. Now, one thing that comes out of this is the question, yeah, but is intelligence fixed or malleable? And Dweck is not quite clear about that. The evidence is pretty clear that there's a few things you can do to modify your intelligence. There's some suggestion that long-term mindfulness practice by enhancing attention and working memory can improve your measures of general intelligence. But by and large, intelligence is fixed. It's not that malleable. And then you may say, oh, then this whole thing is based on, lying to the kids, right? Basically, getting them to relate to intelligence as something malleable. Not really. Not really at all. Because what we're actually talking about here, and that's what I've been continually alluding to here, is that something that is there's a way in which intelligence is terrifically malleable. And this is exactly what mind setting is. The way in which intelligence recursively relates to itself is a way in which we can think about it being rational, but a way in which we can think about it being malleable. And my word slip shows you what my thinking is. A better way of talking about this is that intelligence is fixed, and this is what Stanovich argues, but rationality is highly malleable. And then here's Stanovich's main point about this. We care too much for intelligence and not enough for rationality. Because, yes, intelligence is highly predictive of all these things, and that's why measurements of G are such powerful predictors. But if I wanted to know something about you, now following Stanovich's argument, I want to know not how intelligent you are, I want to know how rational you are. And that is highly malleable. Okay, so what I'm trying to show you is that rationality is an existential issue. It's about how you're identifying with your own cognitive processing and the way in which that identification process can impede how you're applying and using your intelligence, or it can enhance it. And then there's the possibility, right, of cultivating the right kind of recursion and identity, the right kinds of cognitive styles. So somehow we have to put processes of identification, processes of coordinating cognitive styles together, and we can get a clear path for becoming much more rational. And as I'm suggesting to you, therefore, much more wise. Because if we use rationality to better learn how to use rationality and identify with our rationality, then of course, I'm suggesting to you that's wisdom. And as I promised, we should now turn to some of the explicit psychological theories of wisdom. Now, I can't, as I've already mentioned, I can't do all of them. I'm going to zero in on 4 theories that I think are quite representative of central ideas in the psychology of wisdom. And then I will then propose, I'll propose my theory, the work I've done with Leo Ferraro, and I'll put that into sort of dialogue with these existing theories, as well as critiquing the theory that the work that I did with Leo. And then ultimately what we want to do is resituate that account of wisdom, right, into its connection with the cultivation of meaning and the pursuit of enlightenment. We will take a look at that next time. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Meow, 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 meow.
Rough.
Rough, rough, rough.
Rough.
Rough, rough, rough.
Rough.
Rough, rough, rough.
Rough.
Meow, rough.
Yeah. Thought I'd be a little different this time instead of just saying meow.
I like the grumpy cat meows, but the grumpy pup, that's good.
I
That works
was
too.
hanging out with my dad's dog for a few days, so, you know. Except she doesn't go rough. She's small, and she's half Dotson and
She
half
yaps.
Chihuahua. So a little deeper than any yap, but yeah.
Yep.
No, more like a... "Ah! Ah! Ah!"
Whoa.
Ah!
Whoa.
And it's
She
just like-
harumphs.
yeah, when I'm too much for her, she's starting to grumble. So I gotta teach her how to take a little picking on and then give me proper noises instead of just growling at me to be like, hey, come on, leave me alone. Yeah, gotta,
Be polite, doggy jeez.
and also be able to tell me when she's had enough without just growling, because it's like, oh, if you're growling, it means you want to play. Hey, buddy. I got it. She doesn't have an annoying dog friend, so I got to be her annoying dog friend.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so intelligence can enhance relevance realization. So that is rationality, and rationality can be used to improve rationality.
Well, here, let's go deeper on it. Yeah. So we can use intelligence to improve how we use intelligence itself.
Yeah.
And basically, there are many competencies that go into our intelligence, and we can optimize those. So our intelligence is very malleable, and we're going to wrap up with that too. So intelligence being used to improve itself is rationality.
Yeah.
And rationality, which we may be able to use in the same way as we're using intelligence to upgrade itself, we can use rationality to help ourselves be more rational, which would be crucial to the development of wisdom.
Well,
so the further rationalization of rationality leads us to wisdom.
Well, that
and
makes
a
a lot of
locus
sense, though.
and a locus for understanding wisdom as it relates to rationality and intelligence.
As far as like using the thing or say the skill to improve the skill, that does make sense. Mm-hmm. The more you practice something, whether you're an athlete, a musician, or whatever, that helps you even more improve yourself.
Mm-hmm. Your intelligence at whatever activity you're working on.
And not just doing the thing by rote, but actually practicing.
That's right. And so optimizing this process through rationality is more about our capacity to overcome self-deception and to expand our sense of meaning in life. So intelligence mindset, we get into the work of Carol Dweck. And she gave us 2 ways of looking at mindset, a fixed view and a malleable view.
Yeah, so a fixed view is things from birth, like, your height, your height, the color of your eyes, stuff like that, an immutable trait. Whereas the malleable view would be like your weight or how tan you are or, how short your hair is or something like that. It changes. It is malleable.
So there's 2 different ways of looking at intelligence out there, and the fixed view of intelligence really focuses on the product of intelligence itself or the errors that we make. And the errors reveal that if you have the fixed view, then you think that an error reveals you have a defect in a non-changeable way.
Yeah.
It turns error into a permanent revelation.
And a defect in a trait that's permanent. So, in this case of intelligence, well, I'm just stupid. The malleable view is the error points to the skills or effort. So if you're not if you're not, in this sense, if you're not behaving intelligently, well, you must lack the skills, or you're just not trying hard enough.
So you're basically focusing on the error, and to tell yourself that you're wrong and that you can't change. I'm stupid because of the mistake that I made. So you're focused on the mistake.
That would be the fixed view. And
that's the fixed view.
That's the
Things,
product.
You can't change it. I'm just dumb.
Yeah.
But the malleable view of intelligence
I can
takes
work
error
harder,
as pointing us to more effort and skill acquisition. It's change oriented. It focuses on the process. It's like, oh, I must have done something wrong. I wonder where I went wrong. Let me see, and then let me fix that.
So how to trigger a response in people
depends on how you praise them.
Is
Yeah.
So you're so smart. You're so smart. It's just like, well, that's just the product of some trait. Okay,
yeah. Oh, you're
great.
so talented.
Yeah.
Oh, you're so smart. Oh, you're so fast. That's why you won the race. That's a horrible way. And then Jordan Peterson actually focuses on this a lot. It's like, basically praising children this way stunts their capacities and their potential for growth. But if you tell them if you focus on the process, so we praise them for the process, your hard work really paid off. Yeah. The way that you applied yourself to this and how much good work you really put in. I know that was hard for you, but wow, look at this success. Look at what you accomplished. You did this because of your hard work. Focusing on the process is so encouraging.
Oh, you're doing so much better than last week.
There's no limit. There's no peak to your potential from this perspective.
So what Dweck did is made an experiment with 3 groups of kids. So during these, the problems were solved, like all the kids were capable of solving them. So it wasn't necessarily a measure of the intelligence of the children, more the measure of the response according to stimulus. And the stimulus was, after completing a set of problems, one set you would say, oh, you guys are super smart. You're just top notch. You're best around.
Yeah, you guys
Nobody
are so
gonna keep
intelligent.
You down,
No wonder you got such a high score.
And then the B group was, the malleable end of it. Like, oh man, you guys really worked through that, and really
I can tell you were working hard on that. You
Yeah.
did a good job thinking that through.
And then the C group is just like, yeah, you got it right, or you got this one wrong.
So either you're being encouraged for some static trait, your intelligence, or you're being encouraged for the process, the way you approached something and the amount of effort you put into it, or you're just you're being praised neutral.
And I think the neutral. So something interesting about the neutral, and once we get to this part, I'll bring it up again. But the neutral seems like it's like, oh, a test group, but it actually says a lot for the last response. But basically, okay. Yeah. Then there's the second part to this: is you ask the kids, okay, who wants to, go on to some harder problems? The group A kids who, the fixed trait kids who are just, you're so smart. We're like, nah.
No, because they're afraid of being wrong since they're harder problems.
I'm this smart and there's no going above that.
Yeah, so very self-referential in this way that its view of its intelligence is based off
if I did good on these, these were tough, man. And like, I don't know if I could, be smart on the next ones, and then it'll show actually I'm
so they're very only focused on the products they can achieve.
Yeah. So the second second group of kids, which were the ones that were
praised for their process, for the amount of
effort. They were like, sure, let's do it.
They were excited.
We can work it through. We can do better next time.
Yep.
And then you ask, well, who enjoyed it? And group A kids didn't enjoy it. The group B and C kids the C kids tended to more enjoy it. And the group, both group B and C, enjoyed it. But then
B enjoyed it the most, and actually had an interest in taking on those harder problems. So that need for cognition was actually encouraged.
Yeah, whereas group C is just like, no, okay.
So they were eager to do them, and C was like kind of neutral about it. So, okay.
I get out of class for this. Let's go.
Yeah.
And then you give them problems that are just as hard as the first problems, right? And group B does better than group A.
Yeah.
And also, to a certain extent, I don't know if he goes over this.
Because we praise the process, which is actually how you solve a problem.
Yeah.
And we gave them encouragement in that way. So they focused their attention on the processing of the problem rather than just hard problem and here's my level of intelligence versus this hard problem.
And then the final component to this is you ask them about how they felt about it. In group 2 and 3, it's not necessarily a matter of whether they liked it or not. It was whether they're honest, and they told the truth.
Oh yeah, so they were basically told, hey, there's some guy in Germany. You're going to tell him about, your study. He's an exchange student or something like that. And you're going to tell him about how you enjoyed the study. And yeah, Group A didn't enjoy the study. Group B enjoyed.
Well, yeah.
They described that they enjoyed it.
Yeah, so then
40% of the trait focused, so the intelligence focused,
lied
about their success at the problems. That's right. They lied about their success when they were asked to tell someone about it.
Oh yeah,
and then the ones that we focus on process with, the actual amount of work that they put into it and their effort, they told the truth.
Yeah,
whether they did well or not.
That's
they told
what I was
the truth.
getting at. But the interesting point in this is Group B or Group
C.
C. So the third group. Sorry, I went from numbers to letters on my.
No worries, it's simple.
Group C, Group 3. They also told the truth. So that leads me to believe that praising the fixed trait is actually detrimental, because if the neutral group didn't feel like they had to lie still, there's something that goes on with having somebody have a fixed mindset.
Yeah. So when we're teaching or we're parenting or in some kind of authority or eldership role, we should not be trying to encourage our children or our acolytes or students by telling them, oh, you're so smart, that's why you could solve this problem, or oh, you're so fast, that's why you won the race. We should always be focusing on the process. Your effort, your hard work, your stick-to-itiveness, your determination.
Or just good work, buddy.
Yes. It's that
good
simple,
work.
though.
Oh,
it's
work.
on the process. It's
Yeah,
on the process of the actual work and effort that
so
went
maybe
into
one of
it.
the worst things you can tell your daughters is,
And then
you're
you
so
enjoy the
pretty.
process. Then you enjoy the process, too. You enjoy the hard work. So whatever you're training for, be it a marathon or for a,
even imagine this,
physics test.
like when you tell your daughter you're so pretty.
Mm-hmm. What is that doing?
Now being like, I really like your shoes and your dress that you put on today, or you hold yourself
I
very
really
well.
like the poise that you hold yourself with.
That would probably be a much better praise than just saying you're pretty.
I like the way that you care for yourself. You do a good job of caring.
Well,
for
when
yourself.
talking to the lady folks, just telling them, oh, you look so beautiful.
Your
doesn't work.
exercise.
But when you're like, hey, you really cut
your
a rug
process,
out there, they're like, oh.
Your exercise and your eating well has helped you be so beautiful. Your attitude, it makes you so beautiful. The way you act, the way you are is beautiful because, and you always name the process.
Yeah,
it's that simple.
Or if you're an old, you're an old granny, it's like, you're too skinny, you need to eat. And it's not you're born skinny because she wants, or it's not that you're, fixed skinny. She wants to fatten you up.
Yeah.
And she thinks you've been starving yourself.
Yeah.
So even in criticisms,
it still is encouraging, isn't it?
Criticisms too is like, instead of just being like, oh, you suck.
But it is, you're dumb. Instead of saying you're dumb, you maybe approach this problem.
Oh, you never
the wrong way.
Yeah. Or
maybe you could try another way of approaching.
Or hey man, you might want to like spend more time on it.
Yeah. Or try and just breathe for a second. Anything like that helps you get back into the being mode.
So the question is intelligence fixed or is it malleable? Because intelligence seems to be fixed and may very well be, but it also seems to be malleable. And so
that's it. The way that intelligence recursively relates to itself is highly malleable. So even if you only have a certain amount of overall intelligence, how are you using that intelligence?
The rationality is the malleable, and the intelligence.
And so apparently you can increase your general intelligence by using intelligence to recursively relate to itself and upgrade itself in that way to optimize it.
And they're like, I know this is controversial, but if both
you get more horsepower out of your engine.
If both your parents are very, very like highly intelligent and have very well functioning brains, chances are you'll probably too. Maybe not all the times, but there's a better chance of that.
The well functioning,
but
is
that
up
doesn't.
To
yes, exactly.
education.
That doesn't mean you're going to be able to use any of it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been, you have
to train the capacity.
Reading some Thomas Sowell, and like back in the IQ wars, if you will, where we're applying IQ to race and all that crazy stuff. They weren't accounting for different education styles and education levels when they were taking the military IQ tests. And if they did, in the northern areas and people who are educated in the Ohio universities, you saw amongst the black population at level with their white peers, or exceeding, whereas in the South, which, you know, I'm not going to get into the whole cultural end of that book that Sal wrote, but in the South, they didn't have the same education levels or value levels for gaining intelligence and working on it, so it really skewed the numbers.
And they were
And
probably smart about different things.
and then there was people who were like, see, there's some genetic component and inferiority because of race. And it was like, no, you weren't accounting for education levels, because then if you just went to the North, and the thing in the South too, there was just more
Different
white people
styles
and
of schooling.
white people in the North
different cultures.
proportionately. So it averaged out to a more even average, whereas there was less black people in the North at the time than in the South by proportion. So it made it look like a lower IQ. It's not a problem with the IQ test. It's a problem with accounting for, you know,
different modes of being and different kinds of intelligence.
upbringing, value of educating oneself, actually going through it, demands of parents demanding that you do it.
And what are the test questions looking for? You know, they're looking for specific things. They can't cover the whole field of intelligence that people might have access to.
And IQ tests are actually pretty good, because what they do is they take...
But they miss a lot too.
Well,
They
don't, yet again, they don't necessarily account at all for, you know, the environment, you know, your learning environment.
It's
how
very
you're
much
using
your
it,
S2 processing.
how you were praised,
right?
You know, how,
it's very much your S2 processing that it's tracking. It's your working memory mostly.
Yeah.
It's not your insight capacity or even your rationality. And like Vervaeke brought up in this video, if you had a choice and you had to spend time with somebody like working on something, for instance, would you prefer to be with someone that's intelligent or rational?
Yeah.
And most of us are going to prefer to spend our time with someone that's rational, because we know we can actually work with them, or they're going to be reasonable.
Well, and I think we can actually raise our IQ, like, and I'm using that word as like, you know, we can raise our general problem solving ability.
Yes.
Through nurturing, you know, insight and rationality, and doing that. So it's seeming like you can actually make yourself smarter no matter where you start. There might be a maximum of how smart you can get.
And how much of one's intelligence are we actually using when it's not compartmentalized properly?
I know a lot of
If it's
really smart people that are dumb.
Yeah.
Like dumb.
Yeah, I'm dumb about stuff, you know, and then maybe I'm smart about other things, but, you know, we can all notice that within ourselves too. So it's it's a capacity that we all have the potential to upgrade and to optimize at the very least how we're using it.
And perhaps instead of worrying about...
And the tests aren't testing for rationality.
No.
How good one is at problem solving.
Yeah.
And
well, there
very
are,
much of the test. There's some of that.
There are actually a lot of tests that are starting to do that and have been doing that in a certain way, but as far as what we're using...
But like those old tests in the military that they're doing IQ studies off of.
Well, the IQ tests were actually good. It was the scientist analyzing the data and not accounting for certain things.
Right.
That was...
Well, nowadays we also recognize that IQ doesn't quantify one's overall intelligence as well as we used to think.
I was kind of getting at this.
So much of it relies on working memory.
Your base raw intelligence shouldn't necessarily be the only marker for success, because there are people who aren't super geniuses that have become extremely successful and created some of the things that are essential for us flourishing as humans. And, you know, they were no Stephen Hawking. Now, mind you...
But they were wise or rational in some way.
Or worked really, really freaking hard and optimized
and worked
their
really hard,
level and style, if you will, of intelligence usage. You know, and... Because I don't like the idea of, you know, it's just like you're as smart as you're ever going to be. It's like I never felt like... I actually feel like I've been getting smarter. And it's not just more knowledge. It's the ability to use...
That's the wisdom. Yeah, I felt like the wisdom develops.
Yeah.
My access to working memory seems to slowly depreciate over time. But the ability to use what I know and to be willing to second guess myself, to be less absolutely certain and more open-ended, more open-minded, has helped me to recognize problems.
You develop skills to be able to deal with the working memory
very
not working
quickly,
as fast.
that others don't see as quickly sometimes, and it's helped me to certainly to upgrade the use of my intelligence, what intelligence I have, and learn how to more properly apply it. Perhaps
that's the real key. It's not necessarily what the IQ test shows, because you can have having higher IQ is a marker and does have a pretty strong correlation. I don't know what it is at the moment to success. But just because you have it doesn't mean you're going to succeed. And to a certain point, like once you're below 80, it becomes really hard for you to succeed.
And are you going to be able to
But
responsibly use it?
yeah, but
You know,
like,
is the other
there's
question.
perfectly average IQ people that would like blow you out of the water with their understanding of like, say, like war history and other stuff like that. That, like, you're like, oh my
Everyone's
God.
got something to teach,
You know,
man.
it's like-
Everyone's got, you can learn from every single person that
Oh.
you meet out there, no matter how
A good example,
much or less intelligent they are than you.
the hillbilly redneck guy that can barely talk right and, gesture or whatever, but can take apart your vehicle, put it back together, know exactly what parts you need, know how to find them, get them, put them in, have it working better than ever, then write you up a bill of what you owe them, being able to judge how much they should charge. And they seem like some stupid redneck that, I don't think about too many complicated things, but I can sure as hell pull apart your Ford and put it back together. And it's just like, yeah, the level of intelligence to do that is unreal. But also, other than taking a IQ test, how do we socially gauge intelligence too? Because there is something to be said.
Well, we got to
for-
stop just measuring for intelligence, which is one of the things Vervaeke's
Well,
pointing out to
yeah,
us.
but-
We're so hyper focused on intelligence,
well,
but we haven't been focused on rationality in our culture.
Yes, but rationality and intelligence, but the sad fact is, on the immediate glance, people do create assumptions about, people. Our heuristics are there for a reason. They can go out of whack, but if you can, learn how to speak the best you can so you can communicate properly and you can be taken seriously.
More clearly, too. Yeah.
Learn how to gauge social situations and dress to impress if you can. If you don't have a sense of style, I'm sorry, but just the effort means a lot to people. You always see like, the dorky, book nerd professor that shows up to the, coat and tie event with a tweed
Also
jacket.
helps you feel better about yourself.
Sure. Yeah. And it's important to
Put your best foot forward.
Yes, and present yourself.
And that saying says a lot. Put your best foot
Yeah.
forward. Put forward the best version of you.
because you need to take yourself seriously and you need to show people that you take yourself seriously to be taken seriously.
Amen. That's good. That's good advice.
That stuff. If you're looking for that in the manosphere, you're gonna have to sift through a lot of bull crap. But I do hear it in there. Take yourself seriously. Show in way like some people think cars and jewelry and the other stuff is the way that you show that you take yourself seriously. Okay, if that's your thing, cool.
Show, not tell, though, is a very important piece of advice.
Exactly. Because nobody cares about your story about how cool you are and who you met. If you show up in a
what you've done.
Lamborghini with,
Prove that you can actually do it.
not saying that's the way to go, but then other people will take you seriously. So if you do have something to say and you're trying to communicate, you have a more receptive interlocutor,
Yeah. Yeah.
And I want, like, particularly young men, like, get your stuff together as best you can, guys. You can do it. It's not because, there's anything
It'll
wrong.
increase
There's
your
anything
self-confidence, your sense of self-security.
there's nothing permanently wrong with you guys.
The partners you're looking for are attracted to
And,
these
hey,
things.
even if you don't want partners and you just want a better relationship with yourself and
Family,
the world
friends, and
your
oneself.
family and stuff, you can do it. But you gotta care about yourself. Show people that you care about yourself.
If you want to be happier and more at peace with life, take better care of oneself.
And if you
Yeah,
want
because
people
we
to stop
feel that
nagging,
shame and we get depressed when we
man.
don't take care of ourselves, when we're not organizing our homes,
Oh yeah, man.
taking care of ourselves properly. You start to feel more and more psychologically down about yourself, and
Yeah.
that projects.
You gotta clean up your room, eh?
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, I can't
Exactly.
do it, Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, and don't try and solve the problems of the world before you've solved your own. If you can solve your own home personal crises,
You're worth it. You can
if you
do
can
it.
clean yourself up and clean up your room and clean up your home, then okay, you can go out there and start telling the world a little bit about how it could better operate
And
itself.
also, I know I spoke to the dudes, but ladies too. It's just applicable different, and I'm not a lady, so I don't know how that works. Well, I know the physicalities of it, but you know what I mean.
We don't know the experience of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have the gnosis. I'm sorry.
Well, on that note,
Yeah.
we love you guys. This has been a great episode.
Yeah.
And we so appreciate all of you joining us on this ongoing meaning making series. We are down to episode 43. Next week,
man.
it's going to be on wisdom and virtue. And that sounds like it's going to be really profound. That's going to be fun.
It's
So
only
I'm looking forward to
eight
that.
episodes left. Oh,
We're probably going to start
6.
Yeah, at 6 next week.
that's
Yeah.
Eastern Standard Time, 6 p.m. It'd be nice to get to bed a little bit earlier. And
Yeah, I'm getting up earlier these days for work, and I know that you like to get to bed at a decent hour each night as well. So,
I try.
yeah, it'll be a little bit easier for us. So we're gonna move it forward to 6 p.m. Try that out, see how that works. Maybe we'll move it to 7 if 6 is not great. I don't know. We'll see. Because I know West Coast people, 6 o'clock is literally like 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah, but that's the, if you work a normie job, that's when you're starting to wrap things up and you're ready to go home. So it will be your car ride through the terrible traffic.
And most of the people that follow this listen to it on the podcast in audio form. And most people that watch it here on YouTube watch it after the fact. So, it's I guess the time of the live stream isn't so important yet. We're still growing.
Whoever the other person in there is.
Like and subscribe if you like what we're doing. And you're going to help us fund the growth of this channel. And get on to Vervaeke.
Yeah.
Vervaeke's channel, and give John Vervaeke some love. Give him some likes and subscribes. Comment on these videos, guys. That helps the algorithm more than anything. And tell your friends and family. Anybody that's out there that is starting to feel that sense of meaninglessness in the world, or a sense of hopelessness, or is just noticing the growing division, has some concern about it, wants to know what one can do to help. Look at John Vervaeke's work and those others that he's surrounded himself with. There's some amazing people that he's surrounded with, and some beautiful conversations on his channel, as well as meditation advice. You can also find that here on Actuali. We have guided Wim Hof breathing tutorials, guided meditations, poetry readings if you just want something to listen to and relax to, or go to sleep to, and all kinds of other conversations and deep philosophical introspections into the great mysteries of life. That's the name of the game here, is what we do. So love you guys. Thank you so much for joining us. I've been Chris.
I've been DJ.
And we will see you next Wednesday.
Meow.